Good evening, folks, and thank you for the opportunity to present this material to you today. The material I present is laughingly simple, and I think most things are simple if we cut to the quick and get to the right question. And I was inspired to think about this sort of thing one day when I was sitting having a cup of tea on my front lawn, and my dog was sitting beside me, which is a pretty common thing, and we all love our dog. Hands up those of us who have a dog. Maybe 10%. Hands up, and these questions are not related, hands up those who have a wife. Thank you. Or a husband. Oh yes, we're getting there. Excellent. I'm going to teach you one of the most valuable lessons I learned in life, which I learned from my dog, who was sitting on the ground beside me while I was gently having a drink. I was sitting there and my wife drove into the driveway and into the carport. And I'm sitting there drinking my tea, and I'll ask you, what was the dog doing? The dog was standing at the wife's car's door wagging its tail, am I right? What was the dog saying? Whoa, I'm so glad to see you, aren't I? What was I doing, folks? I was sitting there drinking my cup of tea. And I thought to myself, what can I learn from this dog? So I've written a number of books, and the dedication in my last book says it all. And this is the takeaway, and I usually finish my conferences with this, but John and I discussed this, and we wanted to bring it out first. The dedication in the book. I dedicate this book to my recently departed dog, Wally. Perhaps a strange dedication, but to be loved, figuratively, wag your tail and show great joy whenever you see a loved one. This is one of life's great secrets. Now I ask you, when your husband or your spouse or your partner gets home, we know the dog's there going, hello, I'm glad to see you, correct? Are you doing that? Probably not. With the dog, yeah, right. So, folks, I have learnt this great lesson in life from watching my dog. And I thought to myself, wow, the power of observation. And this started me on the journey of what I call opportunity. What is an opportunity? I'm going to show you tonight, in this few minutes, how to swim, how to hit a golf ball, how to use a shovel, and how to build a business, all by using this comparison tool. And then I'll show you how you build that into a matrix thinking tool that can transcend all sorts of marketing applications. For example, I learned by watching my dog I could learn something. And I thought, I compared myself with somebody and I learned something. I thought, what else can I learn? I'll ask a question. Are there any good swimmers in this room? Yes, yes, excellent. There's always good swimmers. When my daughter was 9 years old, she was about that high, and she was about that diameter. You know what little girls are like? About this high and about, 6 inches in diameter. She could swim 5,000 metres, and so could all her friends. And I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. She has no hardware that I can see, no muscles at all. And I'm thinking, how does this work? I've got hardware. I can barely swim 50 metres. And I thought to myself, I should compare myself with my daughter. So I did. Now, when I learned to swim, well, I didn't learn to swim. Like most people of my vintage, someone threw me in the water or in a creek when I was a young kid, and you think I'm going to drown, or you flap your arms and, well, the bank's going past, I guess this is swimming. No. I watched my daughter. I went and watched my daughter how she swam. And tell me if I'm wrong. When I jumped in the water and learned to swim, I was doing that. Wrong. If you want to swim, folks, use the big muscles in your back. You swim with your back. Am I right? Correct. Now, guess what? No one taught me that. As soon as I realised this tool of comparison, I started to make some great breakthroughs in thinking. If somebody can do something you can't do, almost without exception, the difference will be software, not hardware. Software, unless you're a superhuman like Adam Scott or Tiger Woods or Richard Branson or Albert Einstein, these people are not normal. We are normal people. Well, they're not. These are super people. Don Bradman. We are in the normal distribution centre. So I started to think the only difference between us is software. So if you want to learn how to do something, let's observe. And so I came up with this matrix thinking tool, and I defined the word opportunity. Now, the dictionary would define the word opportunity something like, opportunity is a fortunate intersection of events. Sorry, folks, if I'm in business, I don't want to be lucky. Have you ever seen an annual report that says, with a bit of luck, business will turn around? Sorry, I don't invest in luck. I go to church for a bit of that. If you don't invest in shares to get lucky. You want people doing the task for you. So I've redefined the word opportunity. Opportunity we define as an observed, fortunate set of circumstances. Learn to observe. And I do lots of lectures in lots of universities, and at lunchtimes I get the students. I say, I want you to go out, you've got an hour, come back with a business opportunity. Most of them do, because they learn to observe. Now, here's another example of how I've used this in real life practice. I can give you many, many of these. Some years ago, when my kids were at primary school, we had a school working bee where mums and dads all went up to the school, and we had a machine, dug two big trenches in the footy oval, and there was dirt piled beside them. We put pipes in them. And my friend, who was managing the day, gave me a shovel. And he said, Roger, fill in one of these holes. They're only 50 metres long. He said, I'll fill in the other one. And I said, his name was Rob. I said, no worries, Rob. Done. So I got a shovel and I started filling in this hole. I'd gone 10 metres and I was ready to expire. I thought, this is not possible. Guess where my mate Rob was? He was over at the barbecue talking to the girls, drinking beer, eating hamburgers. And I thought to myself, should I compare myself with him? I've got to do this job. So I waited, and I thought, wait till he comes back and starts doing this job. Well, he did. He finally came back, and he picked up his shovel, and he filled in his hole, 50 metres long, whilst he was talking to me, without breaking stride. Now, he's not built any differently from I. He simply knew how to do it. I went and watched him. I said, I've got to compare myself with him. The only difference is software. Now, anyone who's skilled in the art of using a shovel may know this. I see council workers who aren't, and I feel like going to stop and give them a lesson. You don't use a shovel with your arms, folks. We were trying to fill a hole in with dirt. You know how you use a shovel? I bet some people here know. You put it on your knees. This guy had his shovel on his knees, and he was bending his knees like this. Every time he bent his knees, the shovel went forward. I could bend myself off the stage here. And he just filled the whole trench in. I thought, this is incredible. I went back to my hole and I did the same thing. Once again, I'd learnt by comparison. There's another example I can give you of this, an industrial example. Some years ago, it was observed that people loading containers in ships took a long time to do it. They would pick up a container, the crane would move across and it would rock in the breeze and then drop down into the ship. And then they'd go back and pick up another container, rock in the breeze and drop into the ship. And that's the way they loaded ships. And then some fellow said, hey, look, Harry over there, he can load a ship in half the time. What's he, some Superman? Let's go and look what he does. Do you know the difference? Harry had learned to slow his crane down so that the container didn't rock in the breeze and have to wait for it to stop. He just did straight down. Once that observation was made, software was written so that all the cranes could behave in the same manner. Productivity doubled. And of course the wharfies went on strike, but that's another story. There is another example. Now, I wonder if people do this in their businesses. I'm sure you do in part manner. What you do is you have perhaps a group of salespeople all charged with different districts selling similar products. Now, many businesses do that, and you plot revenue per week, per person, etc., and so on. What you'll find when you do that is that most people will be sort of doing the same thing. But guess what? There'll be a Tiger Woods amongst them. There always is. There is always an outstanding performer. Am I right? You know, everyone's doing this and someone's woo up here. What do you do when you find that? You go and you look at that person and you study them and say, what is it that they do differently? It's software, folks. It's not hardware. We need to learn by comparison. As I said, the greatest lesson I learned that tipped me onto this was, in fact, when I saw my dog wagging its tail when my wife came home. And my wife came home. Let's get it right. And I've now taught my wife to do the same, and she does the same for me, and it's wonderful. And I've shown my kids who are grown up, one is now married, I've said the same thing. Wag your tail when you see your loved one, folks. So important. Now, I said I'd show you how to golf ball. Another thing that tipped me onto this was how you play golf. Have you ever noticed that some of these small golfers, quite small, I mean, I'm trying to think, Peter Thompson, a small man, would play golf and hit the ball magnificently. And if anyone has observed how someone hits a golf ball, most people who don't know how to play golf pick up a club and they swing it, right? Is that how you hit a golf ball? Wrong. You know how you hit a golf ball? With your body. Hit it with your behind. That's how you hit a golf ball. You only got to watch what someone does. Compare yourself. I had an experience in Singapore quite recently, and I have to say, since I've observed that, I now hit a golf ball like that. And since I've observed this sort of thing, I apply it everywhere. I was in Singapore recently, and I was at a university, and there were a whole group of students standing around the quadrangle, and they had one of those doodads where you hit the hammer and it go ding and rings a bell, you know that? Well, Singaporeans are not small these days. Singapore people are sort of the size of Australian pretty well. There were a whole group of students sitting there going crash, 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 and I promise you, the gong, they weren't even getting a tenth of the way up to the gong. And I was walking past this with a group of people and I said, I think I can do that. And they said, really? I said, I think I can. And they said, have you ever done it before? I said, no, I haven't. But I've learned how to use my body. I've learned how to use my body by watching people who use their body properly. I promise you, first time I got nearly to the gong, second time nearly, third time nearly blew it off the top. The difference, I wasn't standing there going crash, I was hitting with my back. It's all in the way we do things. Now, based on all this, I came up with the 5 attributes that I look for if I'm going to find a business opportunity. I'll give you a couple of examples of how I've done this. And I created a matrix. I won't draw it here, but the matrix has seeds on this side, which are the 5 fundamentals, and catalysts up here, ways to think about these 5 fundamentals. Let me just give you an example. The 5 seeds are predictable activity. What can I predict will happen? If I could predict something's going to happen, that's like having tomorrow's newspaper. And I do this in many conferences. For example, if you go to a cocktail party, let's pretend tonight's a cocktail party, and all the food's coming around on toothpicks. What's the predictable frustration about the people eating the food? Who can tell me? Thank you very much. I don't know if I did this at the last TEDx. How are we going to solve this problem of disposal of the toothpick, which is now a product with a frustration? What are we going to do for it? If you had a look at my other matrix, which is product development, you would come up with a new material to make it from, which would make it edible. You've just invented the edible toothpick, sir. Took you 2 seconds. You could patent that tomorrow. Believe me. We only have to track people and watch their predictable frustrations. Do you know when honey was being sold in jars, people tracked the predictable frustration. And what was it? It's messy, correct? So what did they do? What happened to sales of honey, folks? Double. Simply by observing the predictable frustration. Another one of these is called widespreadness. The biggest problem with inventors is they see a problem and they solve it for one person themselves. And I have to say, this blows me away. I saw this advertised the other day in the newspaper. 20 years ago, a fellow invented a paint roller, a little paint roller for putting suntan lotion on your back. I mean, what a ridiculous idea. He had a market for one himself. He didn't have a girlfriend. So I couldn't believe this. This is not a widespread, predictable problem. We don't have a problem putting suntan lotion on our back by and large. It's not a predictable problem. I saw recently the other day a fellow written up in the Sun. He's just come out with another one to do exactly the same thing. We should send him the RSVP address perhaps or something, I don't know. Anyway, that's another way you do it. The third one is repetition. What's repetitious? When something's repetitious, there's two ways to take advantage of that as an opportunity. One, remove the repetition by automation. But two, take advantage of it. There are many times you cannot remove repetition. For example, in Australia we collect the garbage every week from our house, correct? In Singapore, every day. In Mumbai, every day. We cannot remove that repetition. It's predictable, it's widespread, it's repetitious. So let's turn that knowledge of that activity into an advantage. So what they're doing now in some places is they're actually putting video cameras on the front of these trucks. They capture the streetscape every day. And if there's a car accident and someone says, oh, I couldn't see the stop line of the traffic light, there was trees hanging over it, they can wind the film back and say, no, it wasn't, or yes, it was. That film can be worth $1 million. A garbage truck costs $600,000, a camera is $1,000, the film can be worth $1 million. Take advantage of repetition. And I can give you an example where I've done this in many, many cases, in widespread. I did some work with some banks. Have a think about this. You'll be astonished at how quickly you can do these calculations. How many staples are used in Australia every day? I can tell you now, if I gave you 2 minutes, you'd all come up with an answer roughly the same. There's about 22,000 tonnes. How can we get rid of those staples? Have a look how they're used. Stapling credit cards to invoices in purchases. There's millions of them per annum. How do we get rid of all that? Don't have credit card receipts, don't have invoices, put it all in the cloud, no paper needed, no staples needed, and guess what? When you go to make a warranty claim, the stuff's in the cloud and there's no argument about when you purchased it. There's a whole paradigm of thinking about opportunity, and this all came from understanding and looking at what my dog did. I compared myself with my dog, had one of the greatest insights of my life. And folks, if there's one takeaway from this message and my talk tonight, please, when you get home tonight, wag your tail. Thank you very much.